Good day. This presentation is about cacao industry in the Philippines. Later in the 17th century, a Spanish galleon transported pure Mesoamerican Criollo to the Philippines. Spain colonized the Philippines as the entrepot for the exchange of global emporium of goods including cacao and other commodities mostly from China and Southeast Asia. The first migration of cacao outside America appears to be pure Criollo, a variety of cacao, from Acapulco on Manila galleons. The seamen carried chocolate on board for drinking on ship. It became the source of most cacao in the Philippines. The price of cacao has obviously been fluctuating. There was a rapid increase in price from 2006 to 2010. Presently, the price of cacao in the domestic market is 125 pesos per kilogram, while the price of cacao in the international market is 133 pesos per kilogram, which is much greater from the domestic price. This means cacao industry is internationally competitive. A good news for our local farmers. Philippines can actually be a potential producer of cocoa, since the environmental conditions are favorable for cacao production. However, the demand for cacao from the Philippines is very high compared to what we can produce. In 2005, we had a deficit of 44,349 metric tons in cacao production. The annual local consumption was 50,000 metric tons, but we have only produced about 5,000 metric tons. The supply from Ivory Coast, where 40% of the world's cacao come from, has been decreasing due to civil war. Therefore, countries with high demands for cacao such as the US are seeking for alternatives. The history of Philippine cacao. Cacao was first introduced in the Philippines by the Spanish colonizers 4 centuries ago. We are the first in Asia to actively produce cacao beans later in 1600s in San Jose, Batangas. By the 1950s, cacao became a highly profitable commodity as commercial cacao farms and processing facilities were established. In the 17th century, a Spanish galleon transported pure Mesoamerican Criollo across the Pacific to the Philippines. The oldest documented record, however, is 1670, a cacao single plant being transported from Acapulco, Mexico. The development of the cacao industry during 1950 to 1980. Investment in processing facilities for cacao and chocolate manufacturing. National Coffee and Cacao Development Program was launched. Philippine Coffee and Cacao Institute was organized. Projects from the Department of Agriculture with the help of the US through USAID. Establishment of commercial-scale cocoa plantation in Mindanao. The government provided tax incentives for investments in cacao growing. There were also private investments on research activities and facilities. These are the events regarding cacao industry from 1980 until present. Production declined from 20,000 metric tons to 6,000 tons. The factors that contributed to this were agrarian reform in 1988, shift from large plantations to smallholder production. International cocoa prices declined while input costs increased. Lack of support services. Pests called cocoa pod borer (CPB). Increase in cost of labor. These are what drove the change in the cacao industry. International cacao prices increased since year 2000. Technical assistance for production, seedling and cacao pod borer control. Post-harvest and marketing support schemes. Factors of production. The following are the major inputs needed for cacao production. Production loans, since most producers are small farmers. Seedlings, planting materials. Fertilizers and agri-chemicals. Botanical pesticides and organic fertilizers. Farm tools, labor, although the household members are usually the workers in the farm. Technology and extension services from the government. Harvesting and pod breaking tools, wet beans collecting containers for converting the beans harvested into dried form. Fermentation and drying facilities. sorting and grading tools and equipment, packaging materials, storage facilities, warehouse to sell either wet or dried beans, market and price information since the farmers are usually price takers, transport facilities, or selling arrangements of farmers and traders whether to pick up or to be delivered. There hasn't been much significant increase in cacao production for years now, although cacao production expansion is recognized to provide a significant contribution to reducing poverty and sustainable agriculture. What can be done? Achievements and lessons learned from past programs can be used to escalate upgrading and expansion. Programs for farmers, supportive institutions and policies for cacao industry since it is a high-value commercial crop. Good germplasm collection at par with the world's best materials. No new land conversion. Utilizing barely 5% of existing monocropped coconut farms could contribute significantly to national economic growth. These are the opportunities and constraints of the cacao industry. Opportunities: high demand in the domestic and international market. There are available support services. Entry of new players in the market pushes prices up. Premium price for fermented cacao. It can be intercropped with coconut and banana areas. Extensive research and development programs for cacao. Good germplasm. Availability of input suppliers. The constraints, however, are high transport cost, limited production and value adding, no imposed quality control, inadequate facilities for production, low farm productivity, inadequate supply of planting materials, high cost of farm inputs. Present status of the cacao industry in government programs and policies. The Philippines is a net importer of cacao. It can be seen in the figure. We import a lot more than we export. Therefore, there has been a trade deficit of cacao from 2005 to 2011. OMG. According to the data from United Nations Commodity Trade Statistics, the Philippines is a net importer of cacao. The Philippines imports various products derived from cacao such as the beans, shells or husks, cacao paste, butter, fat, oil, cacao powder, chocolate and other food containing cacao. Among all these products, processed food such as chocolate from cacao is imported the most. In terms of export, the country exports only cacao beans, cacao paste, cacao butter, fat, oil, cacao powder, and chocolate, although in much smaller amount parallel to what we buy from abroad. We obviously import a lot more products of cacao than export. Why so? We do not have the technology for cocoa production and processing. Although the country's demand for cacao products is significantly high, the annual cacao production only ranged from 5,000 to at most 6,000 metric tons. From 2000 to 2012, shown a reduction in cacao cultivation area from 12,077 hectares in 2000 to 9,337 hectares by 2012. The number of fruit-bearing trees also declined from 4.6 million to 3.8 million in the same period. Correspondingly, production output declined from 6,628 metric tons to 4,831 metric tons. Demand for inputs of production also showed a consistent decline from 12,909 metric tons in 2000 to 6,992 metric tons by 2012. A huge factor affecting the export competitiveness of Philippine cacao is the lack of post-harvest knowledge as well as equipment and facilities to ensure bean quality for chocolate manufacturing. It can also be considered that we might not have a comparative advantage for cacao production and processing. Therefore, importing of cacao products would be a lot more rational. The reason could also be the lack of government interventions, since cacao is not one of the top commodities we produce and export. What are the current policies and programs? Agricultural and Fisheries Modernization Law, or AGRI111. This law aims to modernize the agricultural sector in terms of technological improvement such as investment in research and physical capital, as well as improvement in the sector's technical efficiency through training programs. Input subsidies to the beneficiaries of the programs were also given. The Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law. The law's objective is to distribute land to small farmers from wealthy landowners. The democratization of land ownership caused the fragmentation of cocoa plantation, as the organizations of worker beneficiaries were inadequately prepared to manage large plantations. Additionally, the land area allocated for cacao production decreased since 1990, from 18,388 hectares to 10,000 hectares. The RA7900, or the High Value Crop Development Program Act, this prioritizes the intensification cocoa production. In addition, local farmers have increased their interests in the cultivation of cocoa due to the growing demand from local and international markets. However, local supply still cannot meet the domestic demand. In 2011, the country's cacao production was only able to satisfy 25% of the domestic demand. Sad. BPS Product Certification Scheme. The policy's purpose is to ensure that cocoa products that will be sold domestically or for export meet the requirements of Philippine Standard Quality and Safety Certification Mark Scheme. This is Philippine national standard for cocoa products. The PNS covers the cocoa products such as cocoa beans and tablia, as well as the Code of Agricultural Practices for cacao beans in the country. Characteristics of the cacao farmers and cacao farming interventions. Cacao farmers in the Philippines. The Philippines has been producing cacao since the 1700s. It offers a good source of income for smallholder farmers in the Philippines. In 1990, the area of cocoa planted was about 18,377 hectares, mostly in Davao, Zamboanga Peninsula, Western Visayas, North Mindanao, and Caraga. By 2006, this area had declined to less than 10,000 hectares during the same period. Reported production fell from 9,990 tons to about 5,400 tons, with 2/3 of the production coming from Davao region alone. The top producers of cacao in the country are 1. Davao del Sur, 1,680.79 metric tons. 2. Davao Oriental, 506.16 metric tons. 3. Davao del Norte, 342.03 metric tons. 4. Bukidnon, 310 metric tons. 5. Compostela Valley, 204.61 metric tons. Given the tropical climate of the country, there is a huge opportunity for production and trade for the Philippine cacao industry. However, farmers are still faced with productivity challenges, namely, low productivity and unsustainable farming practices, aging cacao trees, competition for land area with other crops, changing weather conditions, pests and diseases. Cacao farming programs in the Philippines. Cacao Industry Development Association of Mindanao, or AGRI, pushes for cacao farmer training first, before cacao seedlings distribution as a solution to the growing demand of cacao in the domestic and international market. AGRI Executive Director Valentuatur said 80% of cacao farmers in the Philippines are smallholders and could not even finance their own seedlings. Last year, the Department of Agriculture assisted these farmers by giving away 12 million to 15 million seedlings nationwide. The same project was also done a few years before that. He said due to lack of training before distribution, most of these seedlings were not taken care of properly. To facilitate the integration of environmental conservation, AGRI conducted basic environmental seminar for selected cacao farmers in Davao City. They admitted however, that they need assistance from concerned agencies to sustain their watershed conservation efforts. Their objectives were: 1. To address low productivity through increased farmers' access to improved production inputs and cacao farming practices. 2. To improve success as a cacao business enterprise through farmers' organization. The program's achievements are: 1. Access to improved farming inputs and practices. 2. Improved access to information. 3. Enhanced business perspective through the household. OFW Parasamagsazaca, or OPM, has launched a project that encourages overseas Filipino workers to invest in agriculture and partner with cacao farmers of Agusan del Sur in Mindanao. OPM also conducts training programs for the farmers to make sure that their cacao beans can be sold at the best price possible. The income of the farm will be shared equitably by the farmers and their offer partners. Sustainability, standard, and certification are key trends in cacao consumption and supply sources. This is because consumers are paying more attention to the source of the product. Single sourcing, the consumer's overall health concerns, points to researches that are centered around healthy chocolates. This includes new recipes made with herbs and spices, and high demand for food safety assurance. The Philippine cacao industry still remains underdeveloped, even though there is a high demand for the commodity, both domestically and internationally. The development of the cacao industry can be achieved through capital investments and development of effective policies. This in turn will make cacao production attractive, contributing to poverty alleviation and agricultural productivity. Thank you.